Good evening. I'm Darren Walker. I'm Vice President of FAPE, and I want to welcome you to this conversation with four remarkable people. But first, I wish to thank the trustees and Rusty, the National Gallery, for making this beautiful place available to FAPE. And so I want to, on behalf of Joe Carroll Lauder and Eden Rafshun, I want to say that we are here because we're passionate about art. And we have on this panel four people who are very passionate about art. This is what these four remarkable people share in common, although they each play a unique role on the landscape of American art. And there is no need for introductions because each of these people is a dazzling reminder of why the arts gives us oxygen, why philanthropy, arts philanthropy, matters in this country, why the people who create art give us reason for hope and allow our imaginations to expand. So this conversation, why is art necessary, is not going to be one of those platitude-filled conversations about why the arts matter. We're going to get beyond the platitudes. These people are all pretty irreverent. I know each of them, and so I'm going to bring out their irreverence. And so why don't we start with my friend Mark Bradford, speaking of irreverent. So Mark, you have been labeled by an art critic as a creative genius. You deal with issues of race, class, sexual identity. You are one of the most admired artists of your generation. Of course, we were all mesmerized by your installation in the American Pavilion at Venice, the installation at the Hirshhorn now, which is entitled Pickett's Charge. Tell us, for you as an artist, in this moment in America, why does art matter?
I'm tall, I can reach over here. Hey everybody, is this loud enough? Can you hear me? Irreverent, I'm not that irreverent. I say a couple things every now and then, but for me, okay, here's, I don't think much has changed with me that much, actually. I've always been outward looking. I've always thought that the social fabric of society was as seamless as art history. I never saw this, this kind of wall between out there and in there. Sort of like Leonardo da Vinci never saw the difference between like art and science. I never saw the difference between like art and life, art and social, art. So I just picked from whatever I wanted to pick from. And it just kind of folds into my practice. I might go to things that I think, I want to change, or I have things, I want to push back on things. I don't think that diversity is enough. And when you start talking about power and power structures, so maybe that's where some of the, but I've never...
Does your art deal with power and power structure?
Oh, absolutely. I wouldn't have been an abstract painter. The first thing, when I was in school and everyone kept saying, oh, you're black, and tell us about the black experience, and you're gay, tell us about the gay experience, I said, oh, I think I'll be an abstract painter. For me, that was, what that was doing, whoa, can you hear me? What that was doing was that was giving me a space. I was carving out a space for myself to play and to figure out things on my terms. So that was really, I think, the surfaces weren't quote unquote political, or being an abstract painter wasn't political, but to decide to turn my gaze away from kind of easy narratives or something that someone else was going to put on me, that I could interrogate ideas and figure out what black meant to me.
And what does black mean to you?
It's porous. You know, it's as slippery and it's as porous as any other people. I mean, just because you have a room full of the same color doesn't mean that all of the ideas should be the same. And so it's porous, that's it.
But lots of There are people who say, there are some African-American artists who say, I don't want to be labeled a black artist. I don't want my subject matter to have to be limited to issues that relate to African-Americans.
Well, that's not me. I'm fine. I'm fine being a black artist. I'm fine doing shows in Black History Month. I don't have a problem with being black. I have a problem sometimes with the easy equations that kind of mainstream society puts on that. There's nothing wrong with being, I'm fine. I wake up in the morning, I'm black, no problem. Kind of getting old now, you know. I don't think that that is the problem, or to be a woman, or to be whatever. It's the reduced equations and the simplistic narratives that sometimes are put on it. It's expansive. And so that's what I've always moved towards in my work.
So, Frank Stella, President Obama awarded you the National Medal of the Arts.
It was a good idea.
That was a good idea.
And I said there'd be no irreverence this evening. So, Frank, you are yourself this extraordinary person who's able to create remarkable imagery you're a painter, you're a sculptor, you do these really cool prints. For you as an artist, you've seen artists transition from being merely almost invisible people to being rock stars. I mean, Frank Stella is known all around the world. Everyone knows who Frank Stella is.
Right, but you say that, but in historical terms, it's simply not true. The celebrity status after the Second World War, all of a sudden, when Jack the Dripper was, all over Life magazine. I mean, abstract expressionism made an impression not only in America, but I mean worldwide. Everyone wanted to experience the freedom of making a mess. And so, and being an artist at the same time. But, it was different. And, but, again, you're talking about a level of success and what's going on. But I mean, it was a kind of history when Blue Poles went from America to Australia for an unbelievable $2 million. Now, there are artists, whom I won't mention here, who make paintings that sell for more than $2 million on a regular basis. But anyway, that's what it's about. I mean, there was sort of...
That's right. There's no, you're not throwing shade at any artists on this panel, I know. And so would you, though, agree that for you, I mean, what you did as an abstract artist, what you did to the flat surface, the sort of normative idea of thinking about what abstract art looked like on a canvas, you completely turned that on its head.
Yeah, I'm not so sure. But it happened for one reason or another that the surface, working on a surface became difficult. And I don't know what the inherent structure behind abstraction is in the 20th century that means or seemed to point that somehow two-dimensional work had to somehow move out into space or become three-dimensional. I think it's simply because the notion of illusionism was disappearing, and flatness is hard to live with. And even though the painting before was on a flat surface, or a lot of it was, it had depth, it had the experience of space. And somehow the notion of abstraction and painting today, that there was a kind of tremendous urge to get out there, to move out. I mean, now you're inundated with installations, but during the 60s, there was a tremendous change. I mean, not only from it wasn't just sculpture or three-dimensional. I mean, people wanted to get out of their studio and camp in the desert or have tractors, push a lot of dirt around and things like that. So there was a way of moving around and a way of, hiding in some kind of way from a simple projection of surface and a way of dealing with that became art.
Agnes Gunn.
It wasn't my fault.
It wasn't your fault. Agnes Gund, our beloved, dazzling Aggie. So we know you, of course, as one of America's great arts philanthropists, collector. You're the president emerita of MoMA. You founded Studio in the School. You have this remarkable legacy. And now you have thrown yourself into the issue of criminal justice and the reform of our criminal justice system that, I mean, you'd have to be under a rock to not know what you did, right? You sold one of the great Liechtenstein paintings for an unbelievable amount of money, most of which you took to start a fund to reduce mass incarceration in America. So, so art obviously matters to you, Aggie. Talk a little bit about how it matters to you and why.
Well, I just want to say to Mark that I love what Mark's doing with foster care kids. And I love the fact that he really saw a problem and tried to solve it there, is solving it. But you found good from it, haven't you?
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's what I like to see, something that where money can do something and can not always solve the problem, but can at least. And there is a problem. The justice system is really awkwardly wrong in this country. It's people are, herded into these prisons, many of them not having done anything, but not having good representation or anything like that, or not being able to get bail, get out, get a lawyer that really cares about them and their problem being in there. And I think there are a lot of people now working on this, and I think one of them that's doing a great job is your friend, Brian Stevenson, who really has, come to grips with the fact that we have to know more about what happened to slaves in this country and why they have always had a lesser chance to do what they want. I don't know if you read that article recently that said that blacks who come from wealthy families don't do as well as white that come from the same kind of family. And I didn't think it explained it too well, but it really sent a ripple through our lives. And so I think it's largely because I think the system is not just. We have to get people, whether they be white or black, out of or brown or whatever we want to say that somebody is, out of being sort of stockpiled into this system.
Well, when you and I recently, we went to San Quentin and we saw the impact of the arts in that art class and the research that we heard about of how the direct correlation in the reduction of recidivism of those men and women who took that course. So there is a real impact, a direct impact of the arts.
Well, I think there is all around and everything. I mean, we've seen it with Studio in the School with kids there. I mean, every time I go to visit one of the classes and hear some artists that have come and talk to the kids, I really am happy. It makes me so pleased with the fact that these kids are really getting a basic, basic understanding of what art can be and do and look like, and it doesn't have to be right or wrong.
Well, and part of it is that it is what Studio in the School teaches is empathy. And we know from the research what empathy can mean in terms of the ability of of students and as adults ultimately to navigate society.
Well, Frank once came to a class, and he said afterwards, the thing I like about this program is that they share, that they are sitting at the same table, they're looking at each other. I was told all through my art background that I shouldn't show anything that I made to somebody else. They might take the idea. And this is really very different from these kids see that they can learn something from the other, but they don't have to copy it. They can have their own ideas, or they can say, you know, I like the way you've used yellow for the feet, or whatever they're doing. And somebody isn't saying, you can't do that. And they talk, the wonderful thing about this program is they use language to talk about it. They learn a lot of language that, I mean, I thought from the very beginning that when I started having these children, that I had to be sure I talked to them so that they had some knowledge of words. And I think a lot of these kids don't get taught to. Their parents are either off on 2 or 3 jobs, or there's only one of them, so that they
Or
don't.
one is incarcerated, are the kinds of problems that these children face, which are pretty remarkable. But you should be really proud of Studio in the School and what you've done.
Ford Foundation is helping with this, so this.
No commercials for Ford Foundation, Darren. I want to turn to someone whose philanthropy seems to be boundless. I am astounded, David Rubenstein, at the sheer diversity and depth of your philanthropy. In fact, someone wrote about you that you have pioneered this idea of patriotic philanthropy, where you bring the arts and the humanities and American history together. In fact, it seems that you have bought just about every historical document that has ever been produced since the beginning of democracy, the Magna Carta, a Declaration of Independence, an Emancipation Proclamation, and the list goes on and on. Why do you do this, David Rubenstein?
Well, let me try to explain. I came from, like many people here probably, very modest financial circumstances. I grew up in Baltimore, and my parents were blue-collar workers. My father never made more than $7,000, $8,000 a year as a postal worker. Neither of my parents graduated from college or high school. And I grew up in a country where somebody with my last name and came from modest circumstances could make some financial success, and therefore I felt that I should give back to the country. So when I realized I had made more money than I could conceivably spend or than my family could conceivably really need, I decided to try to give back to the country. And so I bought these historic documents to put them on display so that people can see them. And when you see these historic documents, the Magna Carta, Declaration of Independence, the Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th Amendment, when you see the original, you might be inspired to go back and learn a little bit more about the history of these documents. And the reason I think that's important is because we know so little about our history. Today, it turns out that 3/4 of Americans cannot name the 3 branches of government. 3/4 of Americans cannot name the 3 branches of government. 1/3 of Americans cannot name a single right protected by the First Amendment. 35% of Americans, when asked who was the first Treasury Secretary, say Larry Summers, which is not the case. 30% of Americans, when asked what river did George Washington cross during the Revolutionary War, will say the Rhine River. And this is hard to believe, but 10% of Americans believe that Judge Judy is on the United States Supreme Court. And that's not yet the case. So I think that my theory is that if people learn more about history, because when you go visit Monticello or Mount Vernon or other places I've been involved with, you're inspired to go back and learn more. If you just see a historic document or see Monticello on a computer slide, your brain isn't yet stimulated enough, I think, to go back and learn more history. And if you learn more about our history, the good and the bad, and we have plenty of the bad, I think you might create people who are more likely to create a better society. It is hard for me to believe this, but I can't resist saying it, and it's sad that I think most Americans know so little about our background, in part because we don't teach civics anymore. You can graduate from college and not take an American history course. You can major in history in 80% of our colleges and not have to take an American history course. I don't think most people who are born in this country could take a citizenship test required of immigrants to become citizens and pass it. And that's unfortunate. So my idea is to try to get people to learn more about history, and I call it patriotic philanthropy, but it's a misnomer because all philanthropy is patriotic, really. On terms of, let me just address for a moment the arts. Right now, it's very difficult in our politically correct society to criticize anybody. It's hard to do it anymore. So who can you criticize? Who can you make fun of anymore? Well, you can make fun of lawyers, like your lawyers here, but you can get away with lawyer jokes occasionally. Senator, we can get away with members of Congress jokes, right? You can always make fun of members of Congress. You can get a good laugh with that. And of course, you can always make fun of my profession, private equity. People are always making fun of that. And it used to be you could make fun of Neanderthals, right? Who was in favor of Neanderthals? Oh, you're a Neanderthal, right? Well, it turns out that the Neanderthals, 70,000 years ago, put art up on caves in France and Spain. So we can't make fun of Neanderthals anymore because they're actually more talented than we thought. But think about this. What the Neanderthals left behind was maybe a few fossils, but they left behind some artwork. And when you think about it, it reminded me what President Kennedy once said. He said, when the dust settles over the cities of our civilization, what we will really remember is not the battles we fought or the elections we've won, but the spirit of our civilization. That's what remains behind. And so when you all think about your lives, what is it that we're trying to accomplish on the face of the earth? Each of us is here for a finite period of time. And if you get to the point of my age, I'm 68 now, you increasingly begin to realize you want to do something that creates a legacy. You want to do something that reminds people of why you were here. And one of the most lasting things you can do is to create something that is related to the arts, because the arts are the things that make people happy. Thomas Jefferson, in his famous preamble to the Declaration of Independence, said, what we're really all about is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, he never said what happiness was, and nobody really knows, and it's the most elusive thing in life, personal happiness, as everybody knows. But surely, when you go to a art gallery, when you go to an art museum, when you go to a performing arts center, when you go to an opera, when you go to a symphony, what you're coming away with is people who are happy afterwards. And when you can create happiness, that's a terrific thing to do. So when you are supporting the arts, what you're doing is you're creating happiness, and what you're also doing is something you're leaving behind, you're helping artists leave behind a legacy so that 70,000 years from today, when people ask what did our civilization do, there'll be the works of Frank Stella and others that will be here that people can and say, this is what this civilization was about. So I just think the arts are so important because it's what really makes us different than other species. The final point is this. When humans, let's say Homo sapiens, first appeared on the face of the earth, it probably wasn't apparent to all the other animals that were circulating that we would survive and we would ultimately rule the earth, maybe for good or bad. But people looked at us and they'd say, well, they're not as tall as other animals, they're not as fast, they're not as big. But in the end, we had one thing, our human brain, which was the best device on the face of the earth, and that human brain enables us to create art. Other species, there are 10 million species on the face of the earth, but none of them really can create anything that is really art that lives for 70,000 years or more. So what separates humans from other species is our ability to create things that last forever, and that's what we should be proud about as humans, and we should perpetuate that and incent people to create art, all kinds of art, and make sure we preserve the art so that future generations can see it and enjoy it as well.
Yes, Mark Bradford.
Don't look my way.
Mark Bradford. So in the summer of 2017, you set Venice on fire with that provocative, disturbing, brilliant installation. What were you trying to achieve?
Well, what you just said. I mean, no, what was I trying to achieve? I was basically just trying to get my ideas across. I mean, it was a moment of a kind of a rupture when kind of it went from the kind of the Obama administration to the Trump administration, and there was this kind of tumultuous time that was happening. But in the middle of that, I was just basically trying to get my ideas across, this kind of vulnerability that I was feeling, because I felt like it reminded me of the early AIDS epidemic, when there was just no answers. In the beginning, it felt biblical. Early 80s, you could get it from a mosquito, you could get it from sweat, you could get it from walking out of the house. It was just biblical, and I felt like I was in that moment, and so I just tried to embrace it. I tried to just build something that was cohesive and put that vulnerability into the work. I was asking myself as many questions as I was presenting, and
Was there anything that surprised you about the response?
how much they wanted me to be a spokesman for the whole country, and that was.
What do you mean?
Well, you know, they kept asking me like, well, how are you feeling? Like, how are you feeling? How are
These
people
were
in the
foreigners
U.S.
asking you as an American.
I thought, well, what do you mean? How am I feeling? How are you feeling? I mean, what? I mean, I didn't feel like I had that same feeling of I never wanted to be a representative of anything, an object of something. So this kind of pushing back, because I had two installations. I had Venice, and then I worked with the prison in Rio Terra. And so I kind of would go back and forth between the two. But I just found myself kind of pushing back again, these kind of, what does it feel like to be black? Or what does it feel like to be, again, just kind of pushing back against easy equations and trying to navigate myself through it.
So, Frank, I would love for you to talk about what has surprised you when you look back over the remarkable legacy.
Liquid Prel.
Liquid Prel. Really, Frank? Liquid Prel has surprised you, and why would Liquid Prel be something you wish to talk about with these people?
Well, fluidity, materiality, motion. You know, basically, painting is there are a lot of ways of making marks, but right now, painting has to have a material that it applies. We're not etching all the time or digging into stone. So I think that it's really about what you can do and what you can draw from basically what the society and what you have is available to you physically, and how you can actually just pick it up, get into it, and use it, and feel comfortable with it.
And
And the result is it keeps you busy. I mean,
well, you've been busy,
right.
but when you think about what you've been busy doing, what's the legacy you want to leave?
That's tough. I mean, I think legacy is not such a great idea. I don't really. You know, you could say it's just not really interesting.
It's
mean,
interesting to all of us because we
well,
love your work. We're inspired by the
Right,
lessons you have taught us through your work.
Yeah, well, I guess it may survive, but I wouldn't really, in the end, know anything about that.
But you're going to be one of these people David Rubenstein was talking about. I mean, David was just talking about the fact that we artists will be the people who narrate our history. What you leave.
I think all of that's true, but to me personally, it doesn't have a lot of meaning. It's just not important. You act and you live as long as you can. But you know, you're trying to answer questions about what happens in the future, but it's only here and now, especially as you get older.
Indeed, indeed. And what do you feel about this, Mark Bradford? You're leaving a legacy?
No, I don't even, I think I feel the same as Frank. It's not something that bleeds into the studio while I'm making a painting or something. I think I do. I think about the here and now. I think about kind of chasing the tail of that dog that went right around the corner. I think of the next thing. I don't think about the cumulative effect of what I do. I was telling Frank, I walked up to him and I was gushing. I said, oh, I read I studied you when I was in Cal Arts, and he kind of looked at me and said, oh yeah, that's nice, like let's talk about something now. So yeah, I don't think about that. They are constantly telling me about that now, legacy and what you leave behind, and I just find it kind of annoying when they start talking that way.
Well, it's so nice to meet artists with small egos who aren't worried about their legacies. So, Aggie, speaking of legacies, wow, what you're doing.
Something
Will you add something then?
to that. No, it's just, I have always been sort of a little bit jealous of artists because I said to Jasper one time, you get to get rid of all the things that you're thinking about and you're worried about and you're interested in having changed by your art. And he said, that doesn't get rid of everything for me. And I guess I'm jealous of the fact that I can't make art. And I would like to see that happen because I do think that you're freed a lot by making art because you can get completely.
Yeah, we can get it out.
Do you feel free, Frank? Does making art make you feel freer? Does it liberate you in some way?
I don't know. I think I can't tell if you're serious. I mean,
Very serious. I'm very serious. I mean, emotionally, what Aggie is saying is that she used to say to Jasper,
but,
you
I mean,
have this
emotions
out.
Emotions are great, but breathing and eating are, is essential. And I mean, you live the best you can. I mean, it depends how far you want to go thinking about the problems and what you can do. I mean, it's nice to talk about art and say how limited it is and what it can do and all of those things. But in terms of any larger picture of self or society, it's still very small. I mean, after all, some people are as perverse as I am, I suppose, who think that, after all, your consciousness is only an illusion. And so if you're there, you got a problem.
Okay. So you make an interesting point, though, because I would observe that artists have been at the forefront of change, of social progress. Certainly if you look at the 20th century, the artists the painters, the sculptors, the entertainers, the singers.
Yeah, but look what happened in Moscow. I mean, Malevich didn't end up so good, and there are a lot of the avant-garde Russian painters that didn't come to a happy ending.
Right, but you look at the United States.
Revolution is based on the idea that the first people you get rid of are the elite and the artists and the intellectuals.
That's right. And
Well,
the gays.
Yeah, they come
Yes.
too.
Don't forget
Yes.
us.
Okay, so Mark, all right, on that note, Mark, why don't you talk a little bit about this video that we saw of a boy who lived in the hood, in the neighborhood that where your studio is, that caused such a sensation. And it was about identity in some way, and it was about a queer identity of some sort. Is that a fair?
Yeah, I mean, come on, girl. He was working the runway. It was just basically a long shot based on a Marilyn Monroe movie called Niagara. And this young man would walk in front of my studio all the time, and he would just be swishing, honey, just going back and forth. But what I loved about him was, and this is what I'm always looking for, I'm looking for the detail that points to something different. The narrative around South Central is always formed around this hyper-violence or hyper-masculinity. And so I saw this detail of a body that possibly something bad could happen or something good could happen. And so I just take these little details and I expand it to hold all these kind of ideas. Because oftentimes when I'm walking, there are certain areas where my body, my physicality, I feel in danger, and there's sometimes when I don't. I think that your body, depending on where you're navigating in the city, the context changes. And so I really wanted to talk about the possibility of violence or the possibility of something good and the architecture of kind of the city in a way and how it's constantly changing. Sometimes I will not drive down the street if I don't know where I'm going. I just won't drive slow. And
Why is that?
Yeah, because I'm just not, if I don't know the neighborhood and gonna drive slow and knock on a door that I'm not sure, no, I know.
Okay.
A little
Okay.
uncomfortable,
Okay.
a little uncomfortable.
David.
Can I make a point about the access to arts? In the city we're now, Washington, very often what you find is that when Congress is cutting spending, very often they cut the arts. And one of the reasons is that it's often thought by Congress, and not just only Congress, administrations do it, and governments have been doing this, not just this Congress, but previous Congresses. And it's not just Congress, it's local school boards and it's local governments and state governments. They tend to think of the arts as something that's ancillary to life, not essential for it. And I think we should try to, the best we can, to try to convince policymakers that art is essential to one's being and to life, and it's not something that you can add on or take away. So that when we have arts education classes, and the money is a little tight, we get rid of arts education classes, but we keep some of the other subjects. All the subjects are important, but arts shouldn't be seen up as less significant. And if we want to create a society in this country where people feel that they are really going to be able to reach their full potential as a human, they need to be able to understand what the arts are about. They should be able to understand the performing arts, the visual arts, and other arts, and get an education about it, so that when they're older, they can either choose to be an artist if they want, but they can also support the arts, because the arts will always be underfunded. No matter what you say, the arts are always going to be underfunded, relatively speaking. And even though the highest, most valuable works of art get very high prices when they're bought, as a general rule of thumb, artists are underfunded, and the people who are performing art are often underfunded. And so I think one of the missions that we should always have, if we care about the arts, is making clear to policymakers that arts are not something that's ancillary and it's an add-on, but it's really essential to create well-rounded human beings who are likely to be able to pursue happiness much better than if they don't have the arts.
So David, just on this point, I want to follow up. So you spend a lot of time as an arts advocate. What frustrates you about being an arts advocate?
Well, of course, when I was in the first grade, I thought I was going to be an artist, and then in the second grade, I realized I wasn't going to be. It was pretty clear.
So that frustrates you.
Well, clearly, every performing arts institution in the United States cannot make it on its own. That needs philanthropy. There just isn't enough government support, and there isn't enough ticket sales that are going to make it on its own. Every art museum, every thing that provides art access to people so they can see visual arts or performing arts, it has to be subsidized by somebody. Historically, in Europe, it was subsidized by governments. But now in this country, we haven't really been doing that so much recently, and we tend to subsidize it by philanthropists. And maybe that can continue that way, and maybe that's not a bad thing. But we have to recognize that you have to have some kind of subsidy because there isn't enough ability to support it on its own. So all of us probably should feel some obligation to give back to society, and one of the ways you can give back is supporting the arts, and in many different ways, because when you buy tickets or when you are a patron, you're supporting them, but also by giving philanthropy. And I would like to remind people that when you're supporting somebody with philanthropy, philanthropy is an ancient Greek word that means loving humanity. It doesn't mean writing checks. Now, of course, writing checks is helpful, but you can you can provide philanthropy with your time, your energy, your ideas. And the most valuable thing you can give is your time. You can always make more money, or you can make more money if you try hard enough to do so. You can't make more time. Time is the only thing that we don't have more of. But so when you're giving your time, you're volunteering for performing arts organizations, visual arts organizations, you're giving something that's very valuable. And without the volunteers, and without the philanthropists, and without the patrons, we really can't have something like the National Gallery of Art. We can't really have something like the Smithsonian or the Kennedy Center or Lincoln Center. And so in this, and take the Smithsonian, for example, I happen to be the chair of the Board of Regents. We get about 2/3 of our money from the government, but 1/3 comes from philanthropy and other related kinds of sources. I think the National Gallery of Art is probably about 75 to 80% supported by the government, maybe 20, 25% comes from other sources. And we're not going to get enough money from the government to ever provide 100%. So when you think about taking advantage of all the great things in Washington or around the country, you should realize that you need to provide some type of support for it. If it's not money, it's your time, your energy, your ideas, because if you don't do so, in the end, the arts are going to wither away because there isn't going to be enough government money to support a lot of the things we want.
Thank you, David. So, Aggie, you spend a lot of time advocating for the arts too. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your experience in New York City, where you founded Studio in a School. And this program has certainly affected the lives of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of children. But it has always struggled to have the budget that it needs to fulfill its mission.
Oh, well, that is, coming out of what David said, it does take a check or money to do some things, but you also have to have the real care about it, the real love of what it is that I think has to go into the idea of philanthropy. If you can't write a check or if you can't buy something to do something with or invest in a project, you've got to have the willingness to see that somebody's got to do it, and you've got to talk about it, talk with them, get it done. It's the same thing that we should be doing with politics, but we're really not doing it right now in this country. We should be really talking to people about what they see that's needed in a president in the future, or what is what they see about building things. I'll never forget one time I was with a group of people listening to Christo, and this woman raised her hand. She said, "How come you're not interested in supporting hospitals instead of some, useless piece of art out there?" And he said, "It's not the same thing. This isn't going into hospitals. My ideas for doing these things are what is causing them to happen." And I think that's, you've got to get people to be more impassioned by what they want to see happen and what they see done. Maybe this is, for me, the only way I can do art, since I can't do art.
But you are doing art, and I think one of the things that you've taught us is that everyone deserves beauty. We in this country have gotten ourselves into this paradigm where art needs to be justified. Some econometric model, tell me what it does for local development or tax revenue, and that if it passes that hurdle, then the art is justified. But one of the things you've taught us, Aggie, is that beauty is something that should be in everyone's life. And so often what happens is, David, and you experience this, because people will say they only want to give to things they can measure. And therefore, unless it can be measured, we have a lot of philanthropists. You are in the Giving Pledge, and there are some of the prominent Giving Pledge members who talk about that.
Yes. What you're referring to is this. Many people who have been lucky in the business world have made money, and they think that the techniques that used who make money in the business world are techniques you can use in the philanthropy world, which is to say, in the business world, you have a profit loss statement. You can figure out whether you're making money or not. So they like to apply the same type of metrics, more or less, to the philanthropic world, and to measure with great quantitative detail whether their money is having the effect they wanted. And in my case, I'm not criticizing those that do it that way, but I have a different way of looking at it. I just try to think, what is it that can be useful, and try to give money to people who seem like they're going to be able to help what you want to do, and don't be so analytical about it, because I just think you can drive the people doing the work to distort what they're doing to make the numbers look better. But I think people should give money and give their time and their energy and ideas because it makes them happy to do so as well. I have a theory that philanthropists live longer. Grumpy people don't live as long. And happy people live longer. So David Rockefeller made it to 101 or so. I was at an event at Harvard last night, and we're talking about a man whose facility we were in. He was Albert Gordon. He made it to 107. And so if you're happy, you'll live longer. As I say, you're happy is a hard thing to achieve. But if you're happy by giving away money, your time, your ideas, you will live longer. And then there is a special place in heaven reserved for those people who are philanthropists. Now you laugh, but why would you want to take a chance that I'm wrong? So, but to be very serious, I do think that when you are helping other people, it's a human instinct to want to help other people. It's different than perhaps other species. Other species might help their own children or something, but they don't tend to help their species as much. We have a natural human tendency to want to help other people, and I think when you do that, you feel better about yourself. And when you feel better about yourself, I think life is worth living more. And so all of you who have given away your time, your energy, your ideas, probably are happy about it. When you give a scholarship to somebody, nobody says, well, geez, I gave a scholarship to some child, he can go to college now, I'm not happy about myself, I hate myself for doing that. Nobody says that. You're happy because you've done something that in my religion we would call a mitzvah, something that is good. And we should try to incent our younger people to think about doing more that they can to give to the arts, participate in the arts, participate in giving back to society. Arts is just one part of society, but it's an important part, and it's the part that the government is likely to give the least amount of money to when times are tough. When de Tocqueville came to this country in the 1830s and he wrote his famous book about America, he said one of the characteristics of America that defied his previous experience was everybody here was in a volunteer association. Everybody was volunteering for things. And the reason for that was this. In Europe, the government or the church paid for everything, the arts, artists, and so forth. But in our country, we didn't have any wealth at the beginning, so people had to volunteer their time, their energy, ideas, and we began the tradition of philanthropy in this country. We lead the world in philanthropy. We give about 2.5% of our GDP every year to philanthropy, which is double more than any other country does percentage-wise. And we should continue to encourage people to give their time, their energy, their ideas, their money if they have it. And this, I think, will create greater happiness, but also make a greater society, because again, the government can't support all the things that it should support. It just doesn't have the resources, particularly in the arts.
So David Rubenstein says, give away all your money and you'll be happy.
Well, how many tortured billionaires have you met who, they're sitting there with all their money and, sometimes they want to build a pyramid and put all their wealth in it and be buried with it. You can't really do that. It's not necessarily going to produce happiness. So the happiest people I have met are the people who are the most philanthropic.
So artists give a lot too. So I want to hear from the two artists because, what's interesting is artists are always being hounded to give. Give me a piece of art for my auction. Give me a studio visit. Let me auction off dinner with you. All of these things, these ways in which people come at you artists. So Mark, you give a lot. In fact, you in some ways are pioneering something you call art and practice. So you have basically embedded yourself in a community. You have become a big landlord. You bought buildings and blocks of this neighborhood. You're running social service programs in the community. You have an art gallery in the community where you present really very well-known artists. This is a different model for an artist's engagement.
Well, it really was all really just very organic. I mean, it's true we are asked to do quite a bit, but then I think I started to begin to think about not just diversity, not just kind of like, oh, we'll have a few women of color shows or a few women's shows or a few. I started to think about like equity, like power, and like how can we kind of have ownership more. And so for me, that meant to give more people access to these ideas. But what was happening, what I became very much aware of is that these kind of contemporary ideas were circulating in kind of just kind of in the art world. And if you weren't part of that, you weren't having access to this. So I thought, well, and then if you do the math, all the artists oftentimes that get the studio visits or get the net that they're casting isn't that, sometimes can't be can't reach all pockets. So I thought, well, why not take these ideas and just put them in a local neighborhood?
But why did you buy all that real estate? You're like a huge landlord.
Well, that's just because my mom owned a beauty shop and she never bought anything, and we just kept moving and moving and moving. And so I just thought, well, and I thought artists should, if you get a couple dollars, you should buy your studio so nobody can take it away from you. So it just made sense to me. If I really wanted to put down roots in this community, I needed to buy something so that it wouldn't be taken away from me. I think that's
When I was there with you, we walked around, and one of the things you said to me was that you want to keep the sort of indigenous local shopkeepers who always lose their leases when the neighborhood is being gentrified, which that neighborhood in LA is being gentrified. And I think it's a really interesting approach. You and Rick Lowe and Theaster Gates and a number of you are really pioneering a new way of thinking about how artists engage in community. And so you're setting a really interesting model.
Well, it just made sense to me. I think that these ideas are interesting, but I think that we can move out of these silos and we can have these same conversations in different parts of the city. Same conversation, just in different parts of the city. I was in Baltimore and I gave the same artist talk, but I just gave it in a local black church, because I said, well, I want to give. If you want to get the black people, you got to go to church, right? You don't have to keep wondering, oh, where are the black people? Well, find them and then go there. So for me, that was the same thing with, and really what kind of came into my mind all the time is, where's the next local, how are we going to get the next local Mark? On his way to the liquor store or on his way to go buy something for his mom, because that was how are we going to expose him as early as we possibly can to contemporary ideas, to push back against traditional norms of gender, race, class, and all that? Does he have to leave his community constantly, or can we catch him earlier? And so for me, that's really what it became about. Now, of course, I thought that at the same time, dealing with social urgency, and in that area, foster youth is epidemic. It felt like I decided to partner it. They became neighbors. Sometimes neighbors have nothing in common when they move next door to each other, and through just organic, time moves on, they find this kind of common ground. So and that's what's happening. So it was just all organic. And I think that the ideas, progressive ideas, can be spread in more areas.
Darren, I would like to just make a comment about, some people may not be completely familiar with what FAPE actually does. Before we conclude, I would like to talk about what FAPE has done. FAPE is an organization that Jo Carlyle has really created, and Eden Rafshun, and she really run it more or less day to day. But thank you very much for doing that. And Aggie, you've been very involved as well. But in our country, we have embassies around about maybe 200 or so embassies. We have countries we have relationships with. And when you go into an embassy, and I assume most people here have traveled overseas, though it turns out a very small percentage of people in the United States actually have traveled, but I assume out of the country. But most people here probably have traveled overseas. How many people here have been overseas? Everybody? Okay. So when you go into an embassy overseas, you sometimes go to the American embassy overseas if you're an American. But most people go into embassies from the United States are people who live in that country. That it might be the German embassy. The Germans go there more than Americans are going there. When you go into those embassies now, what you have because of FAPE's work is you have works of art by great American artists like those here who have donated those works of art to FAPE, and they are put on display in the embassies so that when you're a German citizen going into the U.S. Embassy in Germany, you can see some of the great works of American arts. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because it shows people in Germany the culture of America and might stimulate them to think more about America, and maybe they'll think better of America because of the wonderful culture, wonderful arts we have. So that's one of the programs that FAPE has, but it's one of the most visible things, and it's one of the things that I think we should thank you all for doing, because now anywhere in the world, when you go to an American embassy, you're going to see the works of art that have been produced by American artists, and those who've generously donated those works of art are to be congratulated. So thank you for what you've done.
Thank you. So how do you see yourself as an artist and the work that you do, Frank, being observed by people who are outside of this country as representing the best of American art?
You know, I don't know if I'm remembering correctly, but in the very beginning, the program was to put art in the embassies, but it wasn't given. I mean, it was loaned. I think in the very beginning, the program.
But actually,
nobody asked us to be that generous. Nobody wanted.
Joe Carroll
But
has asked you to be that generous,
right.
actually, and you have. It's
No,
you
but that
have
was
been
later, but that was
right because that was
much
the
different.
commissioned pieces.
Right, but that was much later than
Yes.
the program.
You have a long history with this program,
Yeah.
but the commission pieces is what David is referring to, and so.
Yeah, no, it's fine, but I'm just saying that the idea was not so much about giving. The idea was to bring the art to the embassies. And the reason, which is obvious, it wasn't anything about Americans or how great the art was. There was a real desire to see the works that were coming from America, and they happened to be mostly abstract art, the favorite kind of art of the CIA. But anyway, the abstract art was popular with the other, and mostly a part of the Cold War. I mean, that was really what it was about. It was about behind the Iron Curtain, and when it was about Russia, and then it gradually expanded to be about Asia. It was spheres of interest where they wanted to send American art, but the desire to send it, I think, is not, as everyone wants to see, is a thing about America wanting to send their art there. That is true probably up to a point, but there was a real desire to have it sent.
Yes.
And I think that's the part that's really hard to understand. It's still hard for me to understand it.
Well, in part, it was sent because there was a view by the United States government that we were in a war of culture with the Soviets, and we wanted to show the best of America. And so we sent art, we sent visual art, we sent the
That
dance
wasn't-
companies.
that wasn't-
The U.S. government has its own program.
Yes,
And that's different than what FAPE does.
Right,
FAPE is
exactly.
a
That was
private sector program.
Yes, what Frank is saying is the early work, going back to the 1960s, during the Kennedy administration, when the idea of cultural diplomacy was first discussed, and we sent art in all disciplines around the world in an effort to demonstrate American culture to the world at a time when there was truly a contest between the United States and between Russia. One of the interesting
Which is, of course, not the
tidbits-
case anymore, right?
Well, but one of the interesting tidbits of Ford Foundation history is the largest grant to the arts we ever made was to the School of American Ballet. And the reason we made that grant was a direct response to Russian ballet. We had our own great ballet master in Mr. Balanchine, and he said to beat the Russians, we need to have a school that is better than the Bolshoi. And so
We still do.
we and other philanthropists stepped up to build the School of American Ballet because it truly was a Sputnik moment. And we wanted to have a company we wanted to beat the Russians at their own game.
Yeah, all of that's true, probably, but it doesn't get to the point of why it was received. If there's such a degree of conflict and such a difference about the opinion and about what should be done, why did it happen? And why did it continue to happen? That's the part I don't actually really understand. But it was never rejected. So if an American culture was sent out, for example, I guess it relates in some kind of mysterious way, nothing could ever stop the advance of the blue jeans, right? Whether there hasn't been a political or any kind of way of thinking about being alive that can deal with the blue jean.
Yes.
So there's no resistance.
There's no resistance because there's something really remarkable and fantastic about it
Yeah, but
that people around the world
attribute
resonate.
What's remarkable about it to us, of what the art that we sent. But what's remarkable is their ability to absorb it. And the reason they can absorb it is they know plenty about it. And it wouldn't have happened if it hadn't happened, if they didn't know a lot about it and set the precedents for what made it possible for us to do it in the first place. So, I mean, if you don't get the circle,
The
if you
circle,
don't get
yes.
what's happening, then, I mean, it's not to the point.
Yes. Okay, Frank has made his point. So I am being given a signal that it is time to close. I want to thank you all. I want to thank Rusty Powell and the trustees of the National Gallery for welcoming us. I want to thank this terrific panel and thank you all for coming this evening for this conversation.